In this video, we're going to continue focusing on building the site structure, including the header and the footer for your site. This is not a navigation lesson quite yet. There's no styling or anything like that, no JavaScript right now. What we're doing here is locking in the skeleton of the site, the big sections and how they relate to each other. In the first lesson, we explored the site layout, and now we'll describe how the big sections work and how they relate to one another. If you get this part right, everything that comes later gets much easier, and if you don't, you end up constantly undoing work or creating code that conflicts with earlier code. So for now, think of everything as a block, just a box. Don't worry about the content, and focus on the general layout and locking that in this week. Before we touch the header or the footer, let's revisit a few things we set in the first lesson. What we learned in this one will build on those. So just a reminder that I did create some simple wrappers and containers, one called site layout. Its only job is to stack the header, the main, the content, and the footer, giving it a max width and centering it on the page so it doesn't get too wide. Inside of that, the header, main, and footer are semantic elements, and each one also has a site level class like site-header, main, and footer. Those names are very important because they're unique and they make it very obvious what part of the page we're working on at that point. A reminder, I also set up a little debugging code. That way when I apply the class debug to the body, it adds temporary colors or borders or whatever I set there, so I can actually see the structure and layout of the page quickly as I develop. And these are not design styles, they're temporary things we're going to turn on and off to use as visual guides. And you don't have to always have the debug class in the body section. You can put it in, like for instance, the header tag, and that will create debugging only in the header area and not the whole site. That way if it gets too confusing with all the debugging on, you can focus on one section at a time. For this, I'm going to leave debugging on everywhere. And notice I added a few more lines from the previous lesson, specifically for grids and flexboxes. Before you write any code, you should be looking at a real site and ask yourself, what are the roles of the header? Not just how it's laid out. I'm using Darn Tough, and you can feel free to use this layout as well. I'm going to exactly steal their template this week. And in the header, I can see the announcement bar at the very top, a row with a secondary navigation and social links on the right there, a main row with the logo, the primary navigation, and user actions like search and the cart. Notice I'm referring to these areas by purpose. This is going to help me with naming and preventing conflicts later on. For this kind of header with multiple rows, different groupings, and things that line up across rows, Grid is the right tool to use here. I'm going to set the grid on the site header itself. I'm also going to add that debug class in there for debug-grid so I can see the outlines of each section in here. And because it's grid, we can loosely throw in the sections and just use BEM naming and turn the site header into a block with elements for the announcement bar, logo, primary nav, secondary nav, social nav, user area, and the hamburger menu. By using site header as a block here, these can't be confused with CSS and anything else on the page. With Flex, we'd have to create wrapper rows like row 1, row 2, and bottom row or something like that. That actually means something, but Grid lets us avoid all that. In the CSS, I'm going to set each element to claim a grid area by defining its area name. Then in the site header class, I'll use grid template areas to visually lay out each section by that name. This makes the structure really readable right in the CSS. You can literally see the layout before you even refresh the page. Again, at this stage, we're not styling content yet. We're just defining the layout structure. With debugging on, it's clear to see what's going on in the grid. Now, if your grid looks messed up, you might have a one-to-one issue in that you have more sections in your grid that are visible than your template says. For instance, the hamburger menu isn't part of the header until the page goes to mobile view. So in this case, I'm just going to set the hamburger menu to have a display of none. And that should lock the grid into place. Now there's a one-to-one match between the sections of the grid and what it says in the CSS. Now at this point, you can think about responsiveness. Let's go back to Darn Tough site to see what happens there. If I open DevTools and click the mobile view and keep toggling that back and forth, or I keep clicking it back and forth and observing three things in the header: what stacks, what moves, and what disappears or shows up. So in this case, when Darn Tough goes to mobile mode, I see the secondary navigation and the social media icons disappear. I see the announcement bar stay there, and I see that third column change to the second column and also the layout. It appears as if now the primary nav is on the left of the logo, but it's represented by the hamburger menu. and the user menu is also shorter than it was before. So again, just focusing on what's happening to the sections and not really worrying about the menu systems, what stacked, what moved, and what disappeared. At this point, you want to start thinking about mobile view first. And this is weird because when I design, I think about desktop view first. So with that being said, I'm going to take all of my code and I'm going to move it down into the media queries so that when my site is in tablet view or larger, this is the behavior I want to have happen. Then I can go back up to the site header, view my page in mobile view, and customize the grid to match this new layout. This time, remembering to hide and show the sections that do or do not show up. This might take a minute to figure out. So technically, secondary navigation, social media navigation, primary navigation, all just disappeared. Instead, the hamburger menu appears and the grid changed. So those are the changes we have to reflect in our CSS. And then go back down to your media query and double check that those sections are correctly hiding or showing so that those snap in as well. Being sure to use mobile view back and forth or sliding the edge of the DevTools out and back until it snaps and you can see it work correctly. This is how you get your foundation locked in this week, regardless of how you choose to go about it. Just be sure it's set up clearly, cleanly, and simply so you can go back and develop on top of this later on without problems or conflicts. The footer represents a different challenge. In Darn Tough's website, it looks like there's two rows, kind of. There's a top row with several columns, 4 navigational columns and 1 email sign-up column, and then a bottom row with 1 full-width column, like for the copyright and stuff. There's no need to align columns across rows, so grid would be kind of overkill here. This problem is a one-dimensional layout problem, which makes flex the right choice for the footer. Here I created 2 sections, one for the site footer top element and one for the site footer bottom element, turning the site footer into a block or a component. And for now, I just created 4 navigation elements in a div, each with some temporary text. I added 2 classes to each nav, and this is important for the next step. The first one is just nav, and the second one is site footer __ nav. Nav will be a component we'll talk about in the next lesson. And then for the second section, I just threw in a div in there. And for the CSS, I made the top and the bottom sections into a flex box with a gap so I can see them more clearly. I also set the flex property of each child element of each section to 1. That way it spans 100%. And each column is going to be equally spaced. And again, thinking mobile view first, when my site is in mobile view, I want the columns in the first section to stack. That's the only change I can see right now in terms of the template. So I'll add flex direction column to the site footer top, and then in my responsive section down below, in my media query, I'll add flex direction row to turn it back when the site exceeds 600 pixels wide. So at the end of this process, whether you followed along exactly with me or came up with your own solution based on your own website, you should have a header with very clearly defined sections right now, a footer that's a dream to look at with clean, simple structure, debug styles that can quickly be turned on and off to help you see the layout immediately, and not any content yet. Don't worry about that. That's coming. It's intentional that we're going this slow at first. We need to lock in these foundational skills before we start adding things like PHP and then working with databases. Without this foundation really locked in this week, the rest of the semester is going to be an uphill fight. So use the discussions to chat it up, talk, help each other out, and share ideas. Next, we're going to focus specifically on the navigation component and how to start adding navigation bars to your website.